Welcome back to a new edition of the Shinsei Fitness Show, where we talk about everything related to your health, your fitness, your well-being. Bushido and training. What is Bushido? I often talk about Bushido on this show and at theshinseimethod.com because it's so influential to me personally, as well as for the development of the Shinsei method. Recall, the Shinsei method was a method I developed to be a method of self-training. It applies to various areas of life, with the ultimate goal of self-development. Personal development. So with personal development, of course, comes growth, and some of the most important characteristics and traits for that self-development are self-reliance and inner strength, inner balance, self-trust, what I call the three pillars of individuality, well-being, and profitability. I found that those are very important characteristics, but in many social settings you don't get a lot of really social support or encouragement to develop those very important traits and characteristics. And when you're talking about Bushido, Bushido is a way of the samurai. Do means way. Translated from the Japanese, the Bushi were the samurai. It's another name for samurai. And of course, the samurai don't exist technically today, but the spirit of the samurai still lives on in various martial arts, martial disciplines, ninjutsu, aikijutsu, some of the more jutsu forms. The jutsu forms were the forms of martial arts that were developed originally for combat, and then they were turned into or developed by various people. Probably the most influential and famous of the people who have developed the Do forms were Jigoro Kano, who developed Judo. Do is the way of the supple art, or the way of suppleness. Suppleness or flexibility, because when you have particularly a stronger opponent or a stronger force that's being applied to a weaker force, rather than resisting that force directly, you become flexible and supple, and how you maneuver that stronger force and use that stronger force against it. So in other words, instead of fighting directly that force directly, you yield. Yield, though, strategically, not yield mentally or psychologically. You yield strategically in order to gain the upper hand strategically. And this is a very important principle of warfare as well. I mean, you attack your opponents where your opponent is weakest as a strategy, not necessarily to win a battle, but as a strategy to ultimately win a battle or a war. And it's just one application of a very important principle. Well, what I have found in the decades-long study of Bushido and really self-defense, I practice and study more practical arts that were derived from some of the more traditional Japanese arts, but more for the application of everyday living for defending your life and property and loved ones, mostly your loved ones in life, to some degree your property if you're at home, as an example. Now, this is not a channel on self-defense per se, but I've studied self-defense and Bushido for many, many years, and it's a very important part of my life, and I've learned and gleaned a lot from that study. One of the things that I've learned in studying it is when you are faced with some kind of challenge or emergency, it's better to be prepared. So preparedness is a very important aspect of the Shinsei method, and it's really a very important aspect of life. Now, I talk about self-defense to the extent that it is an important element of everyday living. But I'm not offering advice. I don't offer legal advice. If you want any specific advice on what you can do in terms of self-defense, you could refer to the local self-defense jury instructions, as an example, in the area where you live. You can certainly talk with a professional in the area, a law professional perhaps, or someone who's knowledgeable. Local law enforcement sometimes can provide some direction in that regard. It's a difficult thing, though, to find people who can give you practical advice on what you can and cannot do in terms of self-defense. You do have a right to self-defense, and I don't go into that specifically. And I'm, again, not offering advice in that area. I am just emphasizing the principles of self-defense that are involved, that are so important for maintaining a level of mental clarity, a mental stability, and really mental health, well-being. It's one of the pillars of individuality, well-being, and profitability that I talk about on this show and on the shinseimethod.com, the Shinsei Method YouTube channel. So it is the influence of Bushido on me in everyday life. Self-defense and practice of self-defense is really Bushido. Bushido is an all-encompassing discipline or idea or concept, philosophy really, a practice of a martial discipline that has one of the goals of course, developing your physical ability through technique and through the training of physical technique, but also to develop your inner self, your inner ability, inner mind, inner psychology, your philosophy, your perspective, your values, your views, your policies, practices, and procedures. So it's really through that twin development of the inner you and the outer you that Bushido is really all about. And so that applies, of course, to self-defense, because when you're talking about self-defense, you're defending your life and your well-being and your family and things that you love. And it's through that value that you hold of life that is the basis upon which self-defense is really based. Because if you don't value life, then there's really no reason to defend it. So that's why I am so influenced by self-defense and the whole concept of self-defense, because it really gets to the value of life. And that really is what the Shinsei method is all about. It's a life principle method. It's about life. It's about the protection of life. It's about the value of life. And not just how you protect it from those more extreme situations of self-defense, but how do you guard and maintain a level of well-being in your everyday life? Protect your values from feeling depressed. Depression is really a destructive mentality. I know I've suffered it and struggled with it for many, many years. And it's through that process of facing depression and facing a lot of personal difficulties that I realized how important things like Bushido actually are. This training, this self-training, this idea of training in techniques, of reminding yourself on a daily basis about what's important to you, and then to establishing a level of objectivity in your life, and sometimes distance in many situations, because in many social situations you don't get a lot of social support, and that certain lack of social support can be very demoralizing for some of these more important things to develop. So developing that inner you is an important aspect of Bushido, of course, but also of the Shinsei method. I just take it a step further with the Shinsei method to focus on you as a goal. Inner strength, inner balance, self-trust. And that really is what the Shinsei method is, that to develop it as a method, specific method to develop a way of looking at things, an orientation, a compass, a waypoint. Through that process of analyzing your key terms, defining those terms in an individually suitable way. In other words, what do things like success, fitness, health, what do they mean to you? Self-defense, life, what do these important concepts mean to you? Love, relationships, marriage, what do they mean to you in an individually suitable way? And why that's so important in fitness or in any aspect of business and life is because when I'm advocating developing a fitness training program, let's say a home training program, some of the concepts that I advocate on this show and at the shinseimethod.com are not in vogue. They used to be to some degree, but they're more balance-oriented. They're more inner-oriented, and that's not really the way of many social settings. That's not the way the culture, that's not the way the, quote, world gravitates toward today. It's not a popular practice to think about how do you develop yourself, to think about your inner workings, your inner thought patterns, to improve yourself or to develop yourself to a greater degree. Now, in many social settings, people look at you like you're crazy if you talk about these kind of concepts. And that, just that alone, that lack of connection with many other people can be very demoralizing. That's why I found the Shinsei method to be so crucial, to develop those three pillars of individuality, well-being, and profitability. And I give them names of pillars of individuality, well-being, and profitability to just make it easy to understand what's important and what's at stake when you are talking about Shinsei, or when you're talking about life principle, or when you're talking about fitness. Now, all of that is important because it's mindset that's crucial when you're talking about fitness today in particular. When you go into any local bookstore, there aren't that many, but there are some. I go frequently because I like books. There are a couple of chains, one chain in particular that I'm a member that I really like. I just like their approach. I like the selection of materials, but they're a bookseller. They don't have anything to do with the cultural trends. They are trying to sell items. But I go in there from time to time to look in the magazine sections, and I look at the fitness magazines, and you can do this online too. And you look at the orientation of the fitness magazine. When you pick up the typical weightlifting magazine and you look at the magazine cover, and if you are a woman or a man, most of the time it's men, but sometimes there are women on the magazines. And if you look at them and you think to yourself, is it really likely if I have a 9-to-5 job where I'm stressed out a lot and I come home and I'm tired, that I'm ever going to look like that? The answer is no. Those people don't work. They have sponsors. I know. I've trained in gyms with professional bodybuilders. They are in the gym all the time, but they get sponsors, and it's a challenge for them sometimes. If they don't get sponsors, they can't go to the gym because they've got to pay money. Unless they live at home, they have to pay rent. So sponsorship is an important aspect of bodybuilding. They don't tell you that in the magazines. They just show you a picture, and somehow through osmosis, you're supposed to be able to achieve that high degree. Well, it's not going to happen unless you spend all of your time in the gym, and it's a 9-to-5 for them. And there's a dedication, an extreme dedication to diet. They diet all the time, and they have a very specific diet that they eat. And I mean, they don't eat anything outside, and particularly when they're training, they don't eat anything outside of what is absolutely necessary for bodybuilding. So I've seen them, for example, just eat things like tuna right out of a can, canned tuna and celery, this raw celery, this kind of thing. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. Simple meals sometimes are better. Sometimes that's a good way to eat because you don't have to do a lot of preparation. But in reality, in terms of your life, in terms of fullness of life, most people are not really going to be able to do that and maintain that level of training. And also with bodybuilders, when they're at when they have that kind of dedication, that's all they do. They usually don't, if they read anything, it's oriented toward bodybuilding and what the next contest is going to be. I mean, they have to be obsessed. And again, I'm not criticizing. This is not a criticism. They're dedicated, and this is not to take anything away from their accomplishments. The ones who don't use drugs and who are balanced, they are dedicated, and they have achieved a high degree of standard. No question about it. And many of the people that you see in the magazines, they also have a genetic potential, which is another thing that I don't often mention in the magazines. So I bring this up because most of what I talk about on this show on the ShinseiMethod.com is a little more oriented toward people like you, or people like me, people who believe in training and who want to achieve a high degree of accomplishment, but within the area of your own life, based upon the kind of life and lifestyle you have, you want to have, you lead, and also what your family situation is like, people that you're involved with. Because a lot of times what you are talking about in terms of fitness is it's a mental situation and a mental status. So if you have a wife or girlfriend, or if you're a woman, you have boyfriends or family members who are completely contrary to this kind of life, well, you either have to change your situation, you have to find a new strategy in life. Usually you have to disengage because it's just too difficult to try to maintain a high degree of fitness, for example, with people who don't care anything about fitness and all they want to do is watch TV. This is a part of the mindset, though. You're not going to be able to do that unless you recognize it, unless you know and take a good look at your own life and figure out what you want in life. Well, that's why I talk about mindset on the show on the ShinseiMethod.com. That's why I spend so much time on mindset in fitness on this show in fitness. I talk about exercises sometimes, but mostly I feel that it's a mindset, and it's a very different mindset, particularly when you're talking about establishing a home gym. Most of the time when people think about working out, they think about going to a gym. Well, if you go to a gym, and I've spent time in a gym, I used to work out in a gym. Usually when I was working out at a gym, I also had a home gym that I complemented. Now I only work out at home. Because what I found is that most gyms are very distracting. There's a lot of music playing, there's TV sets. People are really not there, I don't feel, to work out. I've only worked out at one gym that was dedicated. It was a dedicated powerlifters gym. And the people that went there were powerlifters. That's very hard to find. They're out there, but it's very difficult to find. It was underneath a disco, a nightclub. And the nightclub owner also happened to be a bodybuilder. And that's how he was, because he made his money with the nightclub, but he had a small gym that he opened up on the bottom. It was pretty smart, actually. And he opened it up and allowed people to come in, and there was a bodybuilder, a champion bodybuilder, who was running it. And it was a totally serious gym. They only had serious equipment there. There was none of that fancy equipment there. It was all, and mostly free weights. There were very few machines. That's very difficult to find. And what I also found, though, the advantage of a gym, though, I will have to say, is that it does have machines. And particularly as you get older, the free weights are heavy on your joints. And I have suffered through 2 injuries in my shoulder and back. So one of the things that I talk about on the show and at theshinseimethod.com is how to exercise to avoid injury. Well, one of the ways that you avoid injury really is, first of all, to establish the right mindset, and second of all, to integrate exercise and fitness into your own training regimen, your own mentality and philosophy. That's why I spend so much time on the show on that topic. Now again, I want to emphasize, if you embark on any fitness training program, it's important to talk with a competent professional. Now, I'm not a physical therapist and I'm not a doctor, but I do recommend speaking with a sports medicine physician in particular, in your particular area, particularly a sports medicine physician that has expertise in weight training, and you can ask them, because it matters. If you talk with someone who deals with joggers, runners, he might be able to help, but he's not going to be the same as someone who knows something about weight training. It might be difficult to find, and you maybe have to have a long distance consultation, but I feel it's worth it to go through that process to establish your regimen before you even get started. That's one way to avoid injury, by talking with a professional and then incorporating their advice into your training program, and then search out specific companies that are oriented towards sane, sensible training. I can think of a few offhand. Ironman. Now, I don't get sponsored by Ironman. They don't even know that I'm mentioning it, but I've used their products for many, many decades, and they focus on simple, interesting, home gym-oriented equipment. Eleiko is another good brand. Now, more people know about Eleiko because it's the brand of the Olympic athletes, but there's a reason. They make very good quality products. Now, they're not necessarily inexpensive, and you don't necessarily see them at your local sports equipment store, but you can buy equipment from Eleiko directly. They sell directly these days. And I have owned their training program, which maybe you can see in the background, their training program for decades. I can't use all of the equipment that I have by Eleiko. I always use for example, their weight training belt. It's very equipment. I have one of their knee braces on, and it's lasted a long time. They make very good quality equipment. But when I recommend establishing a home gym, it really is to focus on mindset, to focus on simple equipment, and to focus on this concept of Bushido. The implementation of Bushido, when you're talking about Bushido and fitness and training, it's really about mindset, but it's really about establishing a good technique, a good system, a good fitness training program for yourself, and then practicing on that training program and building on a solid, basic, strong foundational system of home training or of simple exercises. So that's one of the ways I found to avoid injury. It's also one of the ways to cross-train. Now, I cycle on a regular basis. Of course, I mentioned that I train in self-defense regularly, weight training. Now, these days, I don't use weights quite as much. I have gravitated towards sandbag training, which to me is a little easier on the joints. Weights are kind of heavy on your joints, and as I said, I've injured myself, so I'm very specific and very careful about how I use equipment. But sometimes I implement weight training. Mostly it's sandbags. Again, sandbags from Iron Mind, and also it looks like 511 Tactical is another brand that makes very good equipment, I have found. Again, this is not to sell products, but I don't think there's anything wrong with selling products if they're good, so I'm not hesitant on mentioning their brands because they make good quality products. And they make some good quality sandbags, and they also make, and they focus on what I have found also to be very helpful for home gyms, plate systems, where you can put plates to develop the core and insert plates and harnesses on your core, and you can do all kinds of exercises, basic body exercises from push-ups to squats, and even do regular squats with these plates. So every time you add a plate, usually I use around 10 to 12 pounds, no more than 15 generally. You put the plates on, and anything that you do, particularly in martial arts, I found, is very, very helpful. Kicks, strikes, anything you do with a harness, of course, you're adding weights, but I have found that to be less injurious because you're putting the weight on your whole body. The weight goes on the harness. If you put a harness on, a plate system on your torso area, this is your body area. So it's not on your joints, the heavy part of your joints, your knees and your hips. It's a natural thing. You're just adding a little weight there. And when you do movements, strike, jabs, kicks, anything that you do with that, of course, is going to implement those techniques. So there's two examples of how you can implement simple accessory items to what you do in your daily regimen. These are the things that I'm doing, and I just provide that as a basis for developing a home gym, because what I found is more important in developing a home gym is, number one, the mindset, number two, to open up the mind, to have a certain level of creativity. Like I said, that idea of using the harness is not something that I developed, basically. I thought about it. And I found it to be very useful, particularly when you're doing kicks or you're doing any kind of body shifting. You're adding a little bit of weight resistance, but not so much, because you can't put so much weight on those with those harnesses. They're only designed to hold up to a certain level of weight. And see, that is a mindset thing, because usually when you pick up those magazines or anything, it's always more, more, more. Well, more, more, more is not always good, good, good. Sometimes adding a little weight resistance is good, and that is how you build strength. But if you continue to pile on the weights, particularly if you cross-train, you end up putting a lot of emphasis or stress on the joints, particularly the rotator cuff. Now again, I'm not a doctor, but I know something about the rotator cuff because I injured it. And I've had several MRIs on both shoulders. These are the weakest part of the body, and that's, if you're doing strikes on a regular basis, this is always using that area. You have to lift your hand up, and it's repetitive. So it's over the years, it grinds down on those small joints, particularly inside. And if you're also doing presses, that's putting a lot of strain on your shoulders. Of course, the people say, build this up, build this up. Yes, you can build up your shoulders, and it's fine if you're a little younger, but not necessarily. I injured my back many years ago when I was very young doing powerlifting, because when you're powerlifting, you're putting a lot of weight on your body. And I was also doing martial arts at the time, and so, there's not enough rest, I feel. I can't guarantee this. I may have injured myself anyway, but I feel that if you're going to cross-train like that, it's important to focus on one or the other. And in cycling, if you're focusing on weight training, for example, then if you're in martial arts, to let the martial arts take a back seat for a little while. I have found that the martial arts and martial arts techniques, they're a little less heavy on your body. So using the weights as a supplement to martial arts probably puts a lot less on your injury on your body. But it's fun to build up muscle and strength. So I can't say not to do that, because I did that for a long time, and I still focus on strength training. When I talk about strength training is a little different than bodybuilding. You can combine the two, but it really depends on how many reps you do. And I found that powerlifting, particularly when you're lifting and you're doing sets from 5 to 8 reps usually, 8 reps is more of a bodybuilding regimen, 8 to 10 and more. That doesn't mean that you have to focus on that. Some body parts you can do more, usually with the calves, because my calves in particular are a little harder to develop. So I do a few more, but not much. Mainly because of the age, I tend to do less reps and focus more on the strength, but I have to be careful again, because it depends on the area and the injury and things that I have to consider. So what I have found is that you pick one thing that you want to focus on, and then let other activities, in my case it's weight training, cycling, as an adjunct to combat and self-defense and martial arts Bushido training. Those are supplements, and supplements to my life, because I enjoy doing it. I like to go on the outdoors. Same thing with hiking. I enjoy hiking. So hiking, though you don't do it quite as regularly, but you filter that and factor that into your overall regimen. So if I go hiking, I may not do some of the other things for a little while and integrate it into the overall program and take the long view. Now, I want to mention that the long view, it's a long-term view. I'm talking about months and years, not just days and weeks. That's very different from the approach that you normally see in many gyms today, for example, in the magazines. That's why I say the mindset is so important. Most of the time people say, I'm going to go down, I'm going to work on legs today, or I'm going to work on arms today. And that's as far as it goes. And they might do that for a little while and then it stops. Typically, the serious bodybuilders are a little different. They will focus and they are obsessed and they are dedicated to what they're doing. But I'm not talking about their approach. I'm talking about the standard approach. The standard approach tends to be very short-term oriented. I'm just going to go work on legs. I'm going to work on, usually it's not legs too much. It's arms and back or something, upper body generally. And you see this a lot too, particularly a lot of guys. They work out the upper body only, and then you look at them, they don't even want to wear shorts because their legs are like poles. Well, that's not an effective way to train overall in terms of health and fitness and well-being. Obviously, your legs and back are the most of the strongest parts of your body. And if you see any of the professional, let's say bodybuilders or even strength training athletes, they are working. First thing that they will do is they will do big, heavy exercises, usually squats. Now again, I don't do squats quite as often because it puts a lot of strain on the back. I tend to prefer lunges, particularly barbell lunges. But I don't do them quite as much anymore, but I definitely have a penchant and a liking of the Olympic lifts, the clean and jerk, the jerk. Those kind of large, strong, full body exercises are to me outstanding. And if you focus on those and then use some of the smaller exercises, dumbbell exercises, even I said sandbag, as a supplement to that, it's a very good system, and it doesn't take a lot of time. If you do one or two of these, for example, one of the strongest men that has ever lived, quite frankly, and also a bodybuilder, was Reg Park. Reg Park, I think he was from South Africa. He lived some time ago. He was extremely strong and extremely well built, and he wrote several books on the development of your entire body, and he focused on those heavy lifts like that, the clean and jerk and the Olympic lifts. John Grimmick was another famous one. He was American, and he was actually an Olympic coach and performed in the Olympics in strength training. There have been a few others over the years. John Davis. John Davis was another very famous or relatively famous person, John Davis, and a number of others who had tremendous physiques but also were very, very strong. But they focused on those full body exercises. And I found that if you do a full body exercise with some supplemental exercises, that seems to work out quite well and can build up your strength and physical fitness over a period of time. Until the next time on the Shinsei Fitness Channel, where we talk about everything related to your health, your fitness, your well-being.